Hi everyone and welcome. Welcome to the 15th episode of Misplaced. I cannot believe we only have 5 episodes left. It seems like time has flown. So thank you so much for tuning in again. And if this is the first time that you're tuning in, as a reminder, Misplaced is a series about sustainability, in particular with respect to the food system. We talk about issues and we talk with experts, advocates, entrepreneurs, and different types of people about the solutions that are out there. So do sign up with the link in this description if you want to receive the recording from prior episodes and if you'd like to know about the upcoming episodes. Before I introduce our duo speakers here, I just want to thank the venue that is hosting us. It's the Mills Fabrica here in Hong Kong. The Mills Fabrica is an incubator, an investment fund, and a community that focuses on technology and lifestyle companies, as well as in the fields of textile and apparel, as well as food and agriculture. They try to help businesses to accelerate the transition into a more sustainable future. And among their newly acquired incubatees, we have Green Queen from Hong Kong. They'll help Green Queen in co-creating content and diversify their insights, growing their platform and reach a wider audience. All right, I am here joined by Sidhant and Utkarsh from Clearbot and Open Ocean Camera. Hi guys, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. We're lucky to be in the same city and to be able to do this here in person, which is really great. Before I pass it on to these guys, they have super interesting stories to share with you. Just a little bit about Clearbot. Clearbot is a swarm of trash collecting robots that use AI vision to detect and collect trash from water bodies. So I'm not very tech savvy, that's why I had to read all these things from this iPad. And the founders, Sidhant and Utkarsh here, are global prize winners for their research and for their technology in ocean robotics. So today they will talk to us about Clearbot and how they can solve what they believe to be one of the planet's most pressing challenges, which is waste buildup. So we're really curious to hear what these guys have to say. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to you guys. Let me just set you up here. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, maybe we'll start just introducing ourselves.
Yeah.
So, I'm Sidhant,
And I'm Utkarsh.
and we have co-founded Clearbot. So, Clearbot, as you can hopefully see on your screens, is basically a swarm of self-driving robot boats to collect trash out of water bodies. And so, we thought today we'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll have a discussion later to try and see how this relates to all the stuff that's been discussed in the rest of the series. So let's start with the challenge, right? And I think, well, we all know about the issue of marine waste or marine litter, right? Trash in our water bodies. But we kind of approached it from a different angle. So we started looking at how is this trash actually removed from water bodies. And what we found is that there today are no tools to do this kind of work, right? So the best tools we have are pretty much going out with boats and collecting it out with nets, right? And this is how it's been done for a really long time. And we just feel that in this day and age, that should not be what's limiting us from scaling up marine cleanup work. And we found that in places where it's really bad, like for example in Indonesia, they're using excavators to try and pull trash out, right? And although there are sort of specialized tools available, these are super expensive. Like these boats that are designed for cleaning trash, they're very expensive. They require staff of 2 or 3 people to operate. And worse still, pretty much all of them run on diesel, right? Which means that in the process of clearing pollution,
They're making more pollution.
basically making more, right? So that's the polar opposite of what you want. And so we looked at this and we said, okay, what else can we do, right? So we started exploring, asking questions, kind of understanding how the ecosystem works. This is an interesting example. We found out that Land reclamation sites, for example, generate tons of waste because they actually use landfill waste in land reclamation. And what's interesting is, again, because of the lack of tools, they were using like cranes and these giant barges to pull stuff out. And things become even more difficult at night, right? So, God forbid you ever need to clean the water at night, it's so much harder. And so we see a number of issues. Motorboats can't really work in trash dense areas because trash gets stuck in the propellers. And governments see this as a challenge. So in places in Indonesia, the trash flows 4 to 5 times the collection capacity, right? And eventually, what all this means is that there is a negative local impact. So you have flooding in local ecosystems, the trash spills out onto land, creates environmental damage, sanitation issues, health issues. And of course, all of this actually enters our food chain. And that's where things become very interesting, tying into the discussion we're going to have today, right? So it breaks down into microplastics, it's consumed by fish, and it eventually enters the food chain, affects all of us. So a little bit about Clearbot. We actually started sort of developing this idea in Bali in Indonesia about 2 years ago. You can see the screen. We have two pretty well-built lads. So these guys were surf shop owners in Bali, and we kind of worked with them to see how they were cleaning the water. And we worked with them to develop this first kind of robot, which you can see is just made out of local materials. Very, very simple thing. And going from there, about 2 years in, we did a whole bunch of iterations. We did a lot of research with universities, developed the technology that we're now talking about. And the eventual vision was to build a system of these drones that can go out, clean the ocean autonomously, and come back. So this is what our machine kind of looks like today. So it's self-charging, self-navigating boat. It uses a camera on board to detect waste and also classify it. So we're able to look at where the waste is, find out what kind of waste it is, whether it's food packaging, a bottle, cans, and all of that basically helps us understand where this is coming from, right? This is super important to addressing the problem at source. And yeah, of course, using a robotic method is significantly more efficient. So we have a lot more reach. We can collect a lot more trash per day. And this data, as I said, eventually feeds back where the companies that are producing a lot of this packaging stuff actually are now thinking about making a change in the food ecosystem itself. So yeah, that's what our robot looks like. We can collect up to 250 kilos of trash on a single mission. So it goes up the conveyor belt into that little barge at the back. And we're now releasing a new machine which should be able to pick up a lot more, even has an underwater extension. So we're kind of exploring different ideas on what we can do. And pretty much Clearbot is zero emission, which is really important because, as you mentioned in the beginning, most of the traditional solutions use diesel, right? We generate data, we can work 24/7, and so we believe this is the future of sort of marine trash cleanup anyway. Um, and yeah, finally, I'd just like to quickly cover the data side of things because I think it's useful to our discussion today. So today, when we started building this, when Utkarsh and I started building this, we realized there's no data sets for trash, and that means you can't build any technology or AI solutions around sorting plastic waste or sort of doing anything about it. So we started using the community, and basically, we now have a website where people can label images and upload images of food waste or plastic up on our site, and that actually helps our AI get better. So every time you label an image, the AI on our robot becomes ever so slightly better at detecting stuff. So we have 64 different classes, most of which you will realize are like FMCG goods. That's sorry, it's food, fast-moving sort of consumer goods, usually in the food and beverage space. So, and the advantage is we can basically create trash maps like this, which are pretty amazing. So finally, so to conclude and to sort of start our discussion, I'd like to discuss how, from our perspective, what we thought how plastic and the food ecosystem are so closely tied. The first, as I said, is just packaging, right? Like, I mean, 80% of what we collect is probably just
Food packaging.
yeah, packaging and some kind of edible good,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's a can, whether it's a bottle, whether it's just wrappers,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's just such a big component of what we collect that we cannot ignore that the food ecosystem sort of plays a role here. And the second is that eventually this is affecting the food ecosystem itself, right? And so I mean, I guess most people need no introduction, but yeah, this stuff is breaking up into microplastics. As it enters the sea, it's entering fish, and as we eat and consume those fish, the small amounts of plastic entering the human sort of body
Yeah.
and becoming part of our lives.
Yeah.
So yeah, we need better, more sustainable food ecosystems, and I think that's kind of a segue into the discussion we want to have today.
Let me slide back in with you guys. Thanks a lot for this. Hello, everyone. Let's stop sharing here. Thank you so much. That was super interesting, and it's definitely different from the prior episodes that we had, right? I think this is an interesting part for Misplaced because we've moved kind of like along the food system. We are pretty much in the space where we talk about waste and about the impact that happens after consumption. So hearing about and talking about packaging and plastic waste is definitely something that that we need to do. And I think I was pretty, of course, shocked to hear that 80% of the trash that you collect with Clearbot is from packaging. So food packaging, or is it packaging in general? Like,
Well, all
for example,
kinds, to be honest,
all
but I
kinds.
think that
Food and drink.
yeah, food and drinks just makes up a very large percentage.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it's just literally food and beverage.
It's
that
either food packaging, beverages packaging, or food containers.
Yeah.
Take out.
take out
Like the
containers,
takeout
Yeah.
containers.
right? The stuff they wrap apples in, like the crisscross
Oh God,
foam.
yeah.
Yeah, that is
I don't know
very
if that
common.
happens everywhere, but here in Hong Kong, every individual fruit is wrapped in extra plastic to be protected, which is kind of extreme. Yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely something that we have to look out for and try to prevent. And I guess that brings me to the interesting part of what you guys do, which is to build these database where we can collect images of the type of plastic waste, and then they are kind of like hold the producers responsible, right? So that was actually a big topic in our last episode with Bertha, where we were kind of complaining actually about the fact that we as consumers were usually held responsible for these things. But
Right.
and again, maybe Hong Kong is a bit of an extreme case, but if you go to a supermarket, everything is made out of plastic. So I guess I'm interested in seeing how does, from your point of view, that interaction with the producers happen. Do you maybe have a case study where you were successfully able to talk to a food producer and say, look, we're finding like quite a lot of your packaging, something that you should look at, or is this still being tested, and how do you see it?
Sure, there's a couple of things happening. Well, I think firstly, we've got a lot of interest on exactly what you said, the data element of this, right? So we've got, for example, a very large FMCG brand that actually reached out to us earlier this month. And basically they said that, look, we are changing our packaging, right? So over the next 10 years, we need to become more sustainable. We want to change our packaging. But in order to realize which packaging to prioritize, we need to understand what's ending up in the water and what that distribution looks like, right? And so they're basically interested in working with us to use our robots to, well, of course, collect waste out, but more interestingly, collect data, right, on what's in the water, what part of their own products are actually ending up in the water, and which ones they need to kind of change first, or it will have the most impact on this issue. So I think that's interesting. That firstly, I think most brands, for the first time from as far as I know, have actually realized the importance of moving out, right? And most of them just don't know where to start. I think that is so by giving them this sort of data as a service almost, we're helping them understand what's the right point to start to actually start making a difference. The second is not us directly, but there are other people in the same space that we are in. So, for example, ocean cleanup is a very well known project. I don't know if you know, this came actually today morning in the news. Coca-Cola has announced that they're going to be partnering with Ocean Cleanup to set up 15 of those machines across different rivers, right?
All right, I didn't know
And
that.
that basically is a classic case of producer responsibility, right? So basically, the large brands are now publicly supporting this sort of cleanup work, and I think it's more than just, even from there, and it's more than just collecting it out. It's also understanding the root of the problem, because from the way our understanding, the way these sort of large food brands see this, is that they need to figure out the leakage issue. A lot of this waste that ends up in the water isn't stuff that goes into even a traditional waste management system. It's leakage. It doesn't end up in a bin, right?
Okay.
So I think that is where things are interesting, and that's where what we're doing adds.
Yeah,
So the value.
I think for brands as well, like they see data as their way of analyzing where this leakage is from as an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where our data as a service becomes really important to these brands.
Mm-hmm. That's great, and it's kind of a very interesting approach. So like your focus is not so much in the cleaning up part quite yet, right? It's more in supporting a change on the producer side. Or would you say the two objectives are equal? The cleanup
Kind of
and
kind
then
of both,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
I think we started this, to be honest, with the objective of just cleaning
Clean
up,
up.
like as
Okay.
a very simple, okay,
Yeah.
like there's waste in the water, there's no better way to do this, there should be a better way to do this.
Mhm.
That was the premise of starting this. But as we have grown, even as a company, as individuals in this sort of ecosystem, we've come to realize that, well, funny enough, our own goal is to put ourselves out of business, right?
Okay,
In
yeah,
a funny
that
way,
technically we
right?
should get
Yeah.
to the point where we don't need you
Need any-
anymore.
Right. And a lot of that stems from the producers themselves,
Mhm.
right? And I think what we are seeing is an interesting situation where, in terms of like actually spending money on solving the problem, it is actually the producers who are spending the largest. They're spending more than the governments are,
Mm,
right, on trying to figure out solutions. And yet we need to hold them responsible, right? It's a kind of weird cycle.
right.
So I think that as a result, the industry is a very, it's a funny place to be, and it's very hard to navigate around that. But yeah, in terms of our mission, I think it is partly both, right? So it's not just collecting stuff out of the water, even though that's where we started.
Yeah.
But eventually, it's about making the ecosystem make sense.
Right. So closing the circle, so to say.
Right.
I think that's great. And of course, you guys operate here out of Hong Kong, right? Or do you have like offices in other places? I know
We're
your
setting up.
project
We're
started.
setting up, but
Oh,
not yet.
okay.
Not yet.
All right.
COVID,
Setting up.
COVID is really like limited. So we had a project in Indonesia
Mhm.
as well, but until COVID clears out, or at least things become easier in terms of travel, I think it's going to be hard
Right. So
to kind of
that's the
execute.
next step to go back where it started, right? Because
Right.
that's where you started in Indonesia. All right. And in the work that you have done, so I'm sorry if I missed this in your presentation, but I think it's interesting for the audience to know that these guys actually started this project very young when they were still in college at the University of Hong Kong here in Hong Kong. So, and it started as a study project, right? It wasn't necessarily the objective wasn't necessarily to start a business out of
Right.
it, right? So it grew into something much bigger. So you have how many years of experience doing this now? 3 or 4?
Two.
Two. Okay.
Not very
Yeah.
much here.
2 years.
It's relatively fresh.
2 years. I feel like it's a lot. 2 years studying just this specific topic. Is there something about trash in the waters in Hong Kong that stands out compared to what you know about what is globally the case? For example, is there like a type of trash that is more common here, or a type of problem that is more common here?
So I think, well, for starters, Hong Kong relatively
Mhm.
is more clean to begin with, actually,
Okay.
than most other places, to be honest. But nonetheless, I think here it's very dependent on weather,
Mm.
right? So if it rains, then there's suddenly a lot of leakage,
Mhm.
right, into the water, and you see like the water is just full of waste. Similarly, the rainy season, like, so the rivers from China just carry down
Right.
a lot more waste. Like Hong Kong's pretty much on the estuary, right? So it
Yeah.
comes through here.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting in Hong Kong. Like if you're in mid March at Aberdeen Harbour, it's okay. It's not crazy bad, yeah. But if you go in the middle of like October, it's going to be like full of waste.
Mhm.
And so, funny enough, the at least the ocean trash problem is a seasonal issue.
Okay.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
a bit interesting,
Mm.
right? So, and I think in terms of kind of waste, really depends. I think we've seen everything, really, everything. Nothing
What's
we
the
have.
weirdest thing that you've seen in terms
We've
of
seen a
plastic
toy
waste?
once.
Yeah, literally
Like a children's toy, like it
children's
was a
toy.
plastic
Toy.
toy with something attached to it. We couldn't even figure out what it was.
You'll see like Nokia, just the cover of the old Nokia
Oh
phone.
my god,
Well,
remember the
and we picked out that
Nokias?
one. We picked out like just anything,
Yeah.
anything really. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Well, that's really really interesting. I wanted to ask also a little bit more about the open ocean open
Camera.
ocean camera, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The open ocean camera. And does it work together with the Clearbot technology? How does that work, or is it a separate project?
Sure. So we operated separately, but actually they share a lot of sort of core technology ideas anyway. So the open ocean camera is basically combining cameras with AI for underwater use cases, right? That's its specialty, is the model can do really well underwater. And so we started off with conservation. So we used to basically work with conservationists who have a lot of trouble deploying cameras for long periods of time, and we started helping them. And then while we were doing that, we actually started finding a huge use case in fish farms, right? So what's happening is, well, fish stock in the ocean is literally becoming less because of fishing, overfishing, right? As a result of which is becoming more expensive, right? As a result of which aquaculture is becoming, it seems to make more and more sense. And it's also a much more sustainable way of growing seafood per se, right? And so suddenly there's a big need for new technology to make aquaculture more efficient. Usually the feed is really expensive, so they want to monitor the fish, make sure they're happy, healthy, growing, and so we've certainly seen an interesting place for this AI kind of camera technology to exist, where we're helping farmers to effectively know what's happening in their fish farms,
Okay.
right? And make sure the fish are growing healthily, make sure they're not wasting extra feed or polluting the water, all of that stuff.
So what's an example of the application of AI in the fish farming context?
So a few things, yeah. So the first is biomass estimation, right?
Okay.
So what you want to do is find out how many fish are there in a tank and how big they are, and how fast are they growing? Are they growing at a healthy rate? Are there any issues, abnormal behavior, that sort of thing? So you can do that basically with our camera. The second is feed waste estimation. So feed is super expensive,
Yeah.
and excess feed actually causes like diseases for these fish because they rot in the tanks. You know,
Okay, I didn't know
so you don't want to have excess feed. And so the camera can actually detect how much feed is going down through the water column and warn the farmer, today you put in so much extra. And so that reduces the risk of disease and obviously cuts costs. It's a win-win. And finally, we also do oxygen, like we do a water quality suite, right? So you want to make sure the fish have a certain pH that they're comfortable with, certain oxygen level they're comfortable with. Often what happens is you'll have algae growing on the outside of these tanks, and all the fish will die because they run out of oxygen as they're growing, because they require more and more. And so having an oxygen alarm and water quality system basically prevents that from happening and make sure that farmers are on top of what's going on.
That's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting to see how you can apply it to something that has to do with food and the quality of food, right?
Right.
And also, I wasn't aware about this excess feed issue. That's something completely new for us. Really cool. So thanks for sharing that. We were coming here on a taxi, and I think I touched upon that. Just want to say I did not watch the full documentary, so and maybe it's a good thing quite yet, but Seaspiracy is like a big topic these days. Everyone is talking about it. Did you guys have a chance to watch it? Yes.
I've had a chance to watch it.
Okay.
Yeah.
First impressions.
Well, I'm not going to take into aspect how it's changed my view on Clearbot. I think in terms of the food system and the world in general, I was a little shocked because it has made it more. If I have to summarize it, it has made it more difficult for me to eat seafood now.
Right.
So
giving you a bit of eco-anxiety.
yeah, but again, from our business point of view, from Clearbot and Open Ocean Cameras point of view, I think it has only given me more sort of inspiration, more sort of encouragement to work on these projects. It gives me more perspective on the problem that actually exists, and sort of gives me the big picture that what I'm doing is going to make a huge impact to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I'm just at the beginning of the documentary, and I had already to take a break because I found it was like really heavy to digest. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's pretty intense. But I think in terms of like water, ocean waste, etc., one of the first, or probably the first really topic was that most of the plastic waste in the ocean is actually not, or at least that's what they say in the documentary, is actually not our packaging and our stuff is waste from plastic nets, fishing nets, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, do you find that to be the case? Is that something that Clearbot, for example, would pick up on? And then, if that is the case, what is this, the space and the impact that Clearbot can have if it doesn't really target the biggest part of plastic waste?
Sure. So, yeah, tying into that, I think in the open sea,
Mm-hmm.
like out in the really open ocean,
Yeah.
at least under the water, definitely fishnets form a huge part of that problem, right? So we, at the moment, are really focused on the surface level,
Right.
preventing more from leaking into the ocean by cleaning up rivers, and that's kind of our focus.
Yeah.
But you're right, like in the ocean as it exists underwater, at least as probably the largest section of waste is probably fishnets from fishing, right?
Yeah.
So ghost nets are a huge problem. So there are pros and cons. The cons is it's really hard to retrieve, right? Today, really, again, the only way to get this out are divers, right? And we get this question a lot, which is, can you guys do underwater? And at the moment, we think the technology isn't ready to kind of do that yet. So maybe that's the next stage
Right.
that kind of we want to get to as well. The good news is that fish nets are recyclable. Actually, we also work with some recyclers, and the ghost nets that come out of the ocean, typically they can be literally melted and reused.
Right.
So maybe there's a silver lining,
Yeah.
right, to that. While most of the other plastic is much harder to kind of put back into the system.
Gotcha. Yeah. And actually, interestingly, right next door, there is a project done out of recycled fish nets where they
Oh,
build
really?
like
Yeah.
kind of like lamp covers, beautiful. So there's no limit to creativity in that sense, absolutely. And also, would you say that like we support? You said that fish farming in a controlled environment, like the fish farms that you guys are helping with your deep water camera, that's more sustainable. Would that help also solve the problem of fish nets out in the ocean? Is that a direction that you are trying to go towards, encouraging fish farming done this way, for example?
100%. Like, I think, I mean, fishing out of the ocean is just like super, super damaging, right? Especially the kind of techniques they use and whatnot. And it's completely unregulated. And that's part of the biggest problem, right? The open seas belong theoretically to nobody.
Yeah.
They belong to all of us, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's literally a tragedy of the commons situation. And I think that, and what's interesting is when you see marine protected areas being created, the environment's able to bounce back. So these low population numbers that have been depleted due to overfishing, they actually bounce back in within a decade, right? So I think that yes, it's not that sustainable. Like aquaculture is perfect, right? It has its own set of issues, but those issues are much smaller than the damage being caused by going out to sea and the way sort of traditional fishing is done, right? And so that's why we believe like that is the next logical step, next step to sustainability. At the big
Again, I think the fish farms are not the best way, again, as some people might argue, because they don't provide the best of environments for fishes. But I think
So it's like a
technology,
medical kind of issue, or best environment in terms of the health of the fish?
in terms of the health of the fish,
Okay.
and they pollute the water as well. But I think that is where technology comes in to help. If we can use technology to maintain these fish farms properly,
Right.
that would be one step ahead towards like creating a much better ecosystem for at least marine food, for example.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. We're really looking forward to hear, how this deep water camera is evolving. So I see some questions from the audience, and Sabina, I might need your help because I can't really scroll down to the bottom. The first one that I see is from a LinkedIn attendee. Where do you plan to operate in the future? Okay, I think we addressed that when we talked about
Indonesia most likely is where we're going to be next.
Yeah. And then we have a question: what made you decide to get on this field? Yeah, what was your motivation? Your original motivation?
Well, mine was a mixture of a couple of things. Firstly, probably the most easiest decision for me was I love robotics and I love technology. So, I mean, it only made sense for me at that time that I put my sort of passion into something that I would build by myself.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was definitely one thing. And the other thing is sustainability, especially for oceans, uh, is is somewhat exciting to me. Just because, well, it's more of a personal thing than, there's no huge enlightenment or goal behind it. So
Yeah.
but I think it's just a personal issue where I mean, oceans are super, super important for the existence of humans.
Right.
So I feel like ocean sustainability, at least personally for me, I want to do something towards it. So yeah, that was my deciding factor for it.
Found a good
Sure.
way to combine passion and
Fun,
making
yeah.
a pretty big impact as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar, I'm assuming.
Yeah, pretty much the
Pretty
same.
much the
Pretty
same
much
thing.
the same.
Right. So I'm sorry, guys. I'm not reading the names because I can't read that far, but I can read the questions. Why did you decide to operate from Hong Kong? Actually, if I can, maybe it will fit in as well because I mentioned you guys started with a university project, right? So you started really young. I think it would be really great for our audience also to hear from you what are like your top tips for very young entrepreneurs and yeah, especially in the technology field like you. So
Sure. Well, okay. Specific to what we're doing in the ocean space, I think Hong Kong is. We were lucky because Hong Kong is perfect. So I actually think it's not so much we are doing this in Hong Kong, but it's because we are in Hong Kong that we are doing this,
okay.
right? If that makes sense. So Hong Kong is a city that is surrounded by the ocean, and I think most people don't realize how much of Hong Kong's ecosystem is made by is exists because of the marine environment, right? Whether it's the logistics industry, whether it's like even transportation, weather, like everything. It's so crazily affected by the ocean. So I think the city depends on the ocean and vice versa. And the second part is in terms of technology, Hong Kong is in an amazing place because we're near Shenzhen, which is China's kind of tech hub. And so I mean, we can do tech dev way faster than other people. So add the element of the ocean being around, technology development, and of course, Hong Kong being a great financial center to raise money and get funding, and a great government that's supportive of startups. It just, I think, made the perfect ecosystem for us to exist.
It lined up perfectly. Awesome. We have, I guess, one last question. Thanks for the discussion. You mentioned how anyone can upload pictures for data collection. Do you have any thoughts about whether this could be used as a tool for education? That's interesting.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think
We're already using
we're
it.
already kind of doing that. So we work with some NGOs who, well, they basically get students to put these pictures up, the school students typically. So they go down to the beach, they take these pictures, and they then go up to our website and label it. And the NGO helps them understand why it's so important and how this AI is actually going to help the sort of the ecosystem as a whole. So 100%. I think citizen science is a great way. It's two-sided actually. It's a great way for people to play a part in and understand the whole sort of circular ecosystem.
Yeah.
But parallel is also a great way for companies, NGOs, and sort of ecosystem stakeholders like us to get value.
Yeah.
Right. So I think like this sort of labeling tool thing we've done has been really a win-win for both sides. So,
Awesome. So I guess we can encourage everyone to participate and to contribute. I see one more question. Can it hurt fishes while collecting trash?
it's a good question. We get that a lot. So actually, the answer is no. It doesn't hurt fish. So two reasons. Number one, the propellers underwater of Clearbot. So propellers, even though not to us as humans, but to fish, create a lot of noise, and so fish are actually naturally scared away by that. So the things that are not scared away are surface animals. So we have ducks, that sort of thing. So we have a camera on board that basically looks at the water, and we've trained our AI model to detect different kinds of creatures, right? So if it sees a jellyfish or if it sees a bird, then it stops the robot.
Okay.
That system isn't outstandingly perfect. So for example, we had some challenges. So jellyfish look a lot like plastic bags, right?
Yeah.
So there are challenges. It's not that simple, but yes, basically, simply put, 99.9% of marine life is just untouched by us. The robots designed to take care of that and sort of
Not
deal
harm
with
any,
that. Yeah.
not harm any of the fishes.
Fantastic. Well, I think we can feel a bit better about that. We have one more question, a lot of questions today. Which sizes of plastics can Clearbot capture?
Sure. So we have a net mesh on the conveyor that is basically 1 cm by 1 cm hole, right? So anything that's smaller than 9 mm
Mm-hmm.
probably is going to go through, which means we
Okay.
don't collect microplastic, but pretty much anything else
Anything else
just
is
gets
okay.
picked up.
Okay. Awesome. Well, it seems like we managed to go through all the questions. Amazing. And we are slightly over time. So
Right.
I think I'll conclude here. And I really want to thank you guys. This was really, really cool for us. As I said, pretty different from the topics that we discussed before. And it's nice to
Right.
see how it all comes back. So I guess as a conclusion to the episode, I think two things come out pretty clearly here. There are organizations, whether they're businesses like Clearbot or NGOs that really try to help us out build that connection and that bridge with producers. So let's try to take advantage of that, maybe contribute to the database and try to make a small difference out there. And then of course try to produce as little waste as possible. That's always going to be the top recommendation. With that, we'll conclude the episode, and thank you so much, guys. Thanks a lot. Just a reminder to tune in next week for another episode with Amy Franklin next Thursday, I believe. We're going to talk about insects again and about underprivileged communities and how the two things come together. Also, know that we would really like to hear your feedback. So there's a link to fill out our feedback form. And with that, you also stand a chance to win a gift card for our web shop. Thank you so much again, everyone. And I'll see you next week. Bye. Bye, everyone.